It's been a decade-long fight for justice.
We are now 10 years after the MH17 and it doesn't stop.
Nearly 300 people died when Russian-backed separatists shot down a passenger jet over Ukraine.
I pray very hard until it came to my dream and said he's not coming back.
3 men have been convicted of mass murder. Russia refuses to hand them over.
They should be imprisoned.
Now, prosecutors believe Vladimir Putin himself was directly involved in the crime.
We have strong indications that he is himself responsible for this.
I'm 100% sure that the order to send military equipment across the border came from the very top. There's no way that would happen without his direct permission. He's entirely responsible for setting up the conditions for MH17 to be shot down.
In this episode of 101 East, we're going inside the continuing tragedy of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17 and the case against Vladimir Putin. We start our journey in the Malaysian capital Kuala Lumpur, the city that was home to the MH17 crew. I'm on my way to meet the captain's widow. Ivy, hello. Mary, hello. How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Thanks very much for talking to us. That's your husband?
Yes.
Handsome man.
Thank you.
Where is he flying there, do you know?
This one is probably, I think, is around Europe.
Ivy Loy met Eugene Chu while she was a flight attendant at Malaysia Airlines. They had 2 sons, Melvick and Scott, who, aged 13 and 11, wanted to be pilots like their dad.
Since young, I was very lucky. I met a good husband. Everything was very smooth until things happened. Yeah. I actually asked why it happens to me. Because I used to think that flying the airplane is the safest things.
On July 17, 2014, Captain Chu took off from Schiphol Airport outside Amsterdam on a routine flight to Kuala Lumpur. The plane disappeared from radar less than 3 hours later.
That night, around Malaysia time, about 8 something, I suddenly have the feeling that I miss him so much.
The plane was shot down over eastern Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists were staging an armed rebellion against the Ukrainian government. Commercial aircraft have been flying at 33,000 feet, far above the reach of conventional weaponry. But somehow the Boeing passenger jet had been hit.
They told me the flight went missing initially, yeah.
Did you have any hope that things might still be okay?
Of course, yes. As long as they haven't found his body, he might come back. Yeah.
And when did you know for sure that?
Until he came to my dream. I pray very hard until he came to my dream and said he's not coming back.
For Malaysia, it was doubly shocking. Not only were 43 Malaysians dead, including 15 crew, it was the second Malaysia Airlines jet to be lost in 4 months.
A search and rescue operation is underway for a missing Malaysia Airlines plane. Air traffic controllers.
In March, MH370 had mysteriously disappeared without trace. This time, the wreckage was in plain view. Ukrainian intelligence intercepted messages of pro-Russian separatists celebrating the attack.
Только что сбили самолет, дымится.
A short time later, they realized it was a civilian aircraft.
Телевизору передают вроде бы как этот Ан-26 украинский транспортник. Но, говорят, написано на нем малазийские авиалинии. И что он делал на территории Украины?
Ну, значит, завозили шпионов, их нахуй, понял? Не будет так, сейчас война идет, блядь.
So how could a plane flying so high be shot down? The immediate suspicion was that Russia had given the separatists a missile system called a Book Taylor. Its missiles can reach 80,000 feet. President Putin denied any Russian involvement and blamed Ukraine.
И, безусловно, государство, над территорией которого это произошло, несет ответственность за эту страшную трагедию. Я уже дал соответствующее поручение военным ведомствам, чтобы они оказали всю необходимую помощь в расследовании этого преступления.
Despite years of damning evidence, Russia still refuses to concede any role in the crime. Families of the dead have been left in limbo, with no apology, no explanation, and no punishment of the guilty.
I just want justice. I hope it's soon, but God knows when.
It's 10 years since anguished families waited here at Kuala Lumpur International Airport for news of the doomed flight. The deaths of all 298 passengers and crew caused outrage around the world. They came from Canada, Britain, Indonesia, the Philippines, New Zealand, Germany, Belgium. 38 of the passengers were heading home to Australia. But the news was felt hardest in the Netherlands, which lost almost 200 people. And that's where we're heading next. Because for 10 years, investigators have been building criminal cases against Russians, gathering evidence that now points to the very top. Alongside Schiphol Airport, there's a memorial to the tragedy, surrounded by 298 saplings growing into trees. Each represents a victim of the crime. 3 commemorate relatives of Piet Plug, who heads the association of the victims' families.
I lost my brother and his wife and son, and that was a terrible experience. He left 2 daughters who didn't go with him on holiday, so I had to take care of these 2 daughters. I had to tell my parents that their son died. That was really terrible to do, but I had no choice. I had to do it because I was the only one left in the family.
The crash left a deep wound on the nation's soul.
Here are the names of my family. My brother is never found. His remains are never found.
Almost everyone in this small country knew someone who was affected.
This was a huge shock. You are unwillingly part of a big geopolitical conflict and part of a war. And people didn't choose to be part of a war.
As the country with the most victims, the Netherlands was tasked with heading the probe.
Good afternoon.
It formed a joint investigation team with Australia, Malaysia, Ukraine and Belgium.
About the criminal investigation into the downing of flight MH17.
Later led by Dutch prosecutor Dichner van Bertselaer.
When we started this, people said, "You're never going to make this. What are you doing? This is not going to work." But what I say is always step by step, keep on going, just doing what you have to do, and we'll see what happens.
While the official investigators gathered evidence in the field, negotiating with hostile rebels to collect the wreckage, a team of citizen investigators started digging online. Elliot Higgins is the founder of Bellingcat, an Amsterdam-based research group that does open-source investigation, mining data from public platforms like social media. MH17 was its first investigation. Did you think back in July 2014 you were going to be able to solve what happened?
No, I mean, really, it was just starting with the kind of basic building blocks, you know, looking at these photographs and identifying where they were.
Bellingcat soon found proof that Russia was lying.
Over the last 15 years, we've seen the rise of smartphone technology, so there's lots of people on the ground taking photographs, sharing them on social media, which becomes a really big source of information.
So you were able to trace the digital footprint, as it were, the Buk missile coming from Russia to Ukraine.
That's right.
Social media showed Russia had given the rebels a Buk-Taylor missile system just hours before MH17 was shot down.
We were able to show definitively that the missile launcher came from Russia, the specific brigade it came from in Russia, when it was transported. But alongside that, we were able to show different aspects. So we could show the route it travelled on the day. We could show the various soldiers and separatist members who were involved with it, just purely from publicly available information. And we have photographs of the launch plume as well. And then once they realised what they had done, they kind of in a panic sent it back to Russia. And there's audio intercepts of this happening. There's a photograph of the missile launcher heading towards Russia.
Russia fought back with its own version of truth. In the days after the crash, social media sites like Twitter were flooded with claims Ukraine or even the CIA were to blame.
After the plane was shot down, 65,000 tweets were sent out from the troll factory in St. Petersburg saying #Ukraine, Kiev. And I think nobody knew about this at that time. At least I wasn't aware of that sort of mechanism.
Over the past year, Russian media has been voicing a different version, namely that the Malaysian Boeing was shot down by a Ukrainian military jet.
Russian state media, including its English language outlet Russia Today, claimed the investigation could not be trusted.
They didn't present one version of events. They presented multiple pieces of evidence that could support different versions of events, and then let the online community that supported them really kind of pick the one they liked and amplify that.
So they were trying to sow doubts, to sow confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it wasn't for the work we were doing with Bellingcat to, first of all, fact check their claims, which all turned out to be false, and to do the investigation into what really happened with MH17, there would have been a really kind of big gap in the public's knowledge.
Putin's pledge to cooperate with the joint investigation team came to little.
When we asked Russia, where was this Buk-Taylor on such and such date, we never got answers. Or who was the crew of that Buk-Taylor on such and such date, no answers. So at a certain moment we stopped asking.
The disinformation campaign had a striking effect. Sander Essers lost his brother Peter, sister-in-law Jolette, and their two children Emma and Valentine, who was just 17. To his horror, even Dutch people were telling him Russia couldn't be blamed.
Of course I feel anger, and that has grown even more. You see that so much confusion is being created. People I know, some say, well, but I heard there was a Ukrainian fighter going after that, so you shouldn't trust our government because they don't tell you everything.
Perhaps more surprisingly, some world leaders sided with Russia, including Malaysia's Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad.
We are very unhappy because from the very beginning it became a political issue on how to accuse Russia of the wrongdoing. Even before they examined, they already said Russia. Now they say they have to. So it's very difficult for us to accept that.
Prosecutors, meanwhile, had a bigger challenge than public opinion. They had to find the key people responsible and prove their involvement in a court of law. Their first break was that Ukraine had been intercepting messages between separatist leaders and Kremlin representatives.
Because it was a war going on in Ukraine, there were many wiretapped conversations, and as the joint investigation team and also the Dutch police, we had access to that wiretapped conversations.
The wiretaps showed the so-called rebels were actually under the command of Russians. Foremost was Igor Girkin, a former colonel from the Russian spy service who was the rebel defense chief. Codenamed Strelkov, he had repeatedly asked Moscow for superior missiles to shoot down Ukrainian warplanes.
Нам нужна противотанковая артиллерия, нужны танки, нужны нормальные ПВО.
Prosecutors focused on Gherkin and 3 others they believed were instrumental in obtaining the book Taylor.
The many conversations of Gherkin, Dubinsky and Kharchenko and the people around them talking about that they needed a heavier air defense system which could fire higher.
But to bring a case to court, prosecutors had to prove one of those book missiles had actually shot down the plane. Astoundingly, that meant putting the wreckage back together.
Well, we've come to the Gilsarichen Air Base, where the remnants, the pieces of MH17 have been reconstructed like some macabre jigsaw from all the pieces found in this vast area where the plane broke apart and came to earth. And there it is.
Hundreds of pieces were assembled to recreate the front section of the plane, the cockpit and business class. It was the only way to establish beyond doubt what had happened.
You know about it, you read about it, you've seen things about it, but when you enter that part of the plane that's still there and you see the seats, especially the seats in the cockpit of the pilots, and you think, whoa.
This is quite chilling walking through here, seeing how much was destroyed, seeing the cockpit where the captain was sitting, sensing that last horrible moment of the journey. And it's an incredible logistical exercise that they have gathered so much material in hostile territory and pieced it together to try to show what happened. And what they show is the proof, the undeniable proof. It's right there. I'll show you. Now, as the plane was flying over eastern Ukraine, government-controlled territory was way over there to the right. On the left here was rebel territory, and you can clearly see the impact of a missile strike from the rebel side, putting the lie to the claim that it may have been a Ukrainian government warplane that shot it down.
You can see that the firing came from the left-hand corner at the height of the cockpit. You can see the destruction.
The Dutch Safety Board was able to animate the moment of impact.
At 20 minutes and 3 seconds past 1, this warhead explodes to the left and above the cockpit of MH17. About 800 preformed fragments perforate the aeroplane. This impact, combined with the blast of the explosion, causes the cockpit and the business class section to separate. As it descends, the aeroplane disintegrates.
For the prosecutors, this was the key forensic evidence to bring the case to court. They charged Igor Gherkin and 3 others with mass murder.
In this courtroom, we're concerned with what Igor Gherkin, Sergei Dubinsky, Oleg Pulatov, and Leonid Kharchenko did on and around 17 July 2014.
Is there any excuse that they didn't intend to shoot down a passenger jet? They thought they were shooting down a military plane.
It's not an excuse. They took the risk. They knew that with asking for a weapon that could fire higher, they knew there were civil planes there. They put the book Taylor on a little hill, which was really underneath a highway in the sky, and they knew there were civilian planes still flying there, so they are responsible.
Russia refused to extradite them to face trial.
Россия никогда не уклонялась от своей ответственности, если на ее плечах эта ответственность лежит. То, что мы видели и представлено в качестве доказательств вины России, нас абсолютно не устраивает. Мы считаем, что там нет никаких доказательств. И все, что было представлено, ни о чем не говорит.
They were tried in absentia. Over 32 months, the prosecutors laid out the trail that led from the Kremlin to rebel-held territory to the last moment of the flight. Gherkin refused to even have a lawyer, telling journalists he didn't recognize the authority of a Western court.
Я отлично знаю все западное правосудие, как говорится, внимательно слежу. Его лицемерие, оно может быть, выглядит намного более респектабельно, чем лицемерие российского правосудия, но на самом деле не сильно отличается.
Hello, we begin with breaking news from the Netherlands. A court in Amsterdam has convicted 3 men of murder for the downing of flight.
In November 2022, the court found Gherkin and 2 others guilty, sentencing them to life in prison.
Beveelt de rechtbank de gevangenneming van de veroordeelden.
Russia rejected the Dutch court's decision, calling it scandalous.
At the criminal case, it was a file of more than 70,000 pages. I've attended all hearings of the criminal court. There was so much overwhelming evidence. I don't understand why don't they take their own responsibility and say it was a mistake and we are sorry, but they are not able to say sorry.
The court ruled that Russia supplied the deadly book tailor. Prosecutors now wanted to prove who had authorized it. In February 2023, the joint investigation team named a new suspect, Vladimir Putin himself.
There are strong indications that a decision was made at presidential level by President Putin to supply the DPR with the book tailor or, in any event, a heavier air defense system.
The smoking gun was a series of wiretaps where officials said delivery would have to wait until Первый, meaning the first, had signed off.
Ну вот попросили еще неделю, потому что там первый в этом, Франции. Только он принимает решение, больше никто.
This was June 4th, 2014, which on June 5th and 6th there was the D-Day commemoration where Putin was. So you really have at those moments, because something is not going right there, he is not there, he cannot decide, he's in France, we know, everybody knows in the world, you have all the pictures, Putin is in France, so that brings things together that it really is he who decides on it.
Ты не понимаешь, что ты не понимаешь, что дает только первое указание.
The Netherlands is not yet able to mount a criminal case against Putin.
Under Dutch law, heads of state cannot be prosecuted for any offense whatsoever, even war crimes.
But Ms. Bertzelaer told 101 East he may eventually be charged.
When he's no longer head of state and when we have enough evidence, and it also depends on what other cases will there ever be against Putin.
So is that the end of the matter?
No, we can't do anything now, but we're still open for new information and we're ready for that, yeah. Everything we can do in our investigation from here, from outside of Russia, we did. The rest of the answers are there, and who knows, one day someone will bring us those answers, and then we're ready.
For now, Putin appears to have got away with murder. Not just for MH17, but for all the civilians and soldiers killed in Ukraine since 2014. Some believe the weak reaction to MH17 gave a green light to Putin's dream of a full-scale invasion.
I think a lot of politicians just didn't want to confront Russia, and even after it became clear that Russia was involved in Ukraine and they did shoot down MH17, I think that really was so many years later that they thought they could really still avoid that issue. But what that really did was create a permission structure for Putin to invade in 2022. So there really should have been a stronger reaction to that at the time, and I think we could have prevented what happened in 2022.
In the final insult to the families, Gherkin was eventually jailed in Russia, but it had nothing to do with MH17. In January, he was sentenced to 4 years for inciting extremism after insulting Putin and suggesting he might run against him in the next election.
He's gone to jail because he had a big mouth about Putin, and that's difficult for the next of kin because we think he has to go to jail for life for his role in the downing of Flight MH17.
101 East contacted the Kremlin press office regarding the allegations made in this program. There was no response. Back in Malaysia, Ivy Loy goes through the daily challenge of dealing with loss. She has spent 10 years trying to be both mother and father to her 2 sons. They've decided to pursue their childhood dreams. Scott, now 21, is in England studying to become a pilot like his dad. Melvik, now 23, is already flying.
My whole plan was not to become a pilot anymore because of what happened to my dad, but I guess somehow you still end up going towards this path.
Life goes on.
Yeah, life does go on. It's something that I have to do to continue the family's legacy.